I'm Dr. Don Lynch, and I want to talk to you about kingdom leadership at the gates. Jesus spoke the word church for the first time in Matthew 16. When that word came out of his mouth, the Holy Spirit inspired the record to be the Greek word Ekklesia. And Jesus said, I will build my church, my Ekklesia, and the gates of hell, or the strategically positioned authorities of a kingdom called Hades, will be displaced. As I build it, as it expands, they will be displaced. They will not be able to withstand that building. I will give you the keys of the kingdom keys, which means whatever has already been approved, allowed, blessed, expanded in heaven, then you can approve, allow, bless, and expand on the earth. Whatever's been limited, already limited in heaven, with the decision of the king, your kingdom keys will allow you to limit, close, disallow, curse in the earth. So Jesus is speaking about governmental function, and he uses the word Ekklesia. Now, for a long period of time, we've had this misconception. I understand why, but the misconception was that the word Ekklesia, kaleo being called, ek meaning out, means called out, and therefore the assumption has been that the church is called out of the world. Here's the problem with that. It's not true. The word ek can mean out. Kaleo certainly means called, invite, but not in the sense of invitation, but in the sense of being chosen, selected, appointed, ordained. But the word ek can also mean in. Now, if you were a Greek, you would immediately understand you had a different word to say called out. But when you said, or anyone else said, Ekklesia, they were speaking a technical term, legislative, cultural term that said called into assembly. That the people who had the authorization, the right to speak acceptance or rejection to those citywide or regional affairs of the culture, would be the people with these leaders would be called into assembly by someone who had the authorization to announce the intentions of the king, and that group of people gathered together would then approve or disapprove of the kingdom keys, what the king had announced as his intentions. So when Jesus said, I will build my ecclesia, and the spiritual authorities of another kingdom who are in the gates won't be able to call their assembly together and approve them. No, Jesus, I'm going to build my ecclesia, and then the leaders I position at the gates, they are going to have the keys of the kingdom, that what heaven wants will be approved in the earth. What heaven wants will be disapproved in the earth. And he's speaking of the cultural aspects of any region. Now, don't picture this as a city that built a wall and then installed a gate. Understand this is a region spread out with farms and cattle, and shepherding is going on all across the area, but in the midst of it is a place where some gates were built, a large functional facility that was usually more than one story high, and included in the gates was the actual mechanism, the door that opened or lifted or was raised, that concerned the issue of entrance and exit. But the gates wasn't the door, wasn't the opening, it wasn't the gate that physically closed, the heavy timbers that were bound together in order to close or when open, move out of the way. No, the gates were what was built first, and the gates held the authorities who determined the parameters of the rest of the wall and selected the locations of other gates. So lesser gates were all controlled by the main gates, and the main gates defined the city. But when the city, in the sense of that we determine the city, it was the refuge into which everyone in the region could go for protection, come in to do commerce, come in to sell and to buy, come in to determine the legal aspects of ownership, come in to determine marriage, family, relationship with children, inheritances, and all the business of the kingdom was done because the gates held the authorities. Now Jesus said, I'm going to build my ecclesia. Now his ecclesia would come from the kingdom. It's not the church, believers called out of the world. You get out of the world and you're born into the kingdom. Then you grow up in the kingdom, and then when you have been matured as a kingdom leader, you can accept the responsibility of functioning with the keys. We don't give keys to babies. We don't give keys even to adolescents. We give keys to people who can function with spiritual maturity. And so when Jesus says Ekklesia, he's referring to the leaders he can send who can stand in the gates, announce for him, and then call together into an assembly kingdom leaders at the gate. They come to the gates. They come to the main gates and they hear the announcement. Here's what the king says he wants done. His apostolic representative announces the intentions of the king by an apostolic didache, or the teachings of the compiled principles, protocols and procedures that the king said, this is how I want my culture to function. And I'll tell you, I'll define marriage, and I'll define good parenting, and I'll define good relationships, and I'll define how to problem solve any of those that fall into disarray. I will tell you what to allow, not to and what to not allow, and I will tell you what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong, and I will give commands of my kingdom, and I'll expect all of my kingdom to obey them. And I'll expect the leaders that I position to teach every culture to obey those commands, all of them. So in this way, Jesus says, my leaders will come in, there will be a birthing of kingdom leaders, they will be called together into assembly. My ecclesia will have the spiritual keys to influence the rest of the ecclesia of the enemy. And the ecclesia of the enemy that has been making the decisions will begin to be displaced by the growth of building of an ecclesia within that culture that will displace the authorities of those at the gates. And he said, I'll put my leaders in the gates, and the people that respond to the King of Heaven in the gates will begin to release and establish a new culture and expand that culture, its principles, processes, and protocols, so that it alters not only what's inside those walls, but the entire region that responds to those gates. And we'll begin to determine what comes in and what goes out, and we'll begin to govern the process of determining what pleases the king. I will build my ecclesia. It's not the accumulation of believers, it's the discipling and fathering of kingdom leaders who can be prepared and positioned at the gates. This is Dr. Don Lynch, and I'll be back to talk more about kingdom leaders at the gates as our understanding of ecclesia returns to its originating design and definition out of the mouth of Jesus of Nazareth, our Messiah and King.